Hello everybody, my name is Brady and I'm a 19th century American historian and we're back with another React video, and today we're going to be finishing the Sengoku Jidai series from Extra History. But before we get started, I have a couple pieces of business that I do want to take care of. First of all, shout out to the newest channel members. Thank you to Kevin O'Neill, Corey Alleman, Hildebrandt, and Zach Cole. Thank you all for becoming channel members, and if any of you want to become a channel member, there's a link to do so in the description box below. Now, the next piece of business we have is the poll that I did when I put out the previous video. Which series am I going to do next from Extra History? So I put it up to you guys. I put 4 fairly popular requests. Well, 3 popular requests and a thing about paper money, which did surprisingly well considering. And Otto von Bismarck won, so that's the one we're going to be doing. Really ran away with it too. I'm not surprised. It was definitely the most popular suggestion. So I was just kind of setting that one up for you guys to knock it out of the park. And we had 1,800 people voting. So I think we got a decent sample size there. Now, let's get into the Sengoku Jidai stuff. So once we're done with this, we can get into the Otto von Bismarck series. So I've really enjoyed this series. It's very foreign to me. Eastern history, as you all know at this point, is not really my thing. So everything about this has felt brand new, which has been really cool. So I'm very excited to wrap this stuff up. At the point we left off on, it felt like a good point to end things, give a few little details about the legacy of the Sengoku Jidai, and maybe you could wrap it up. But this one is called the Campaign of Sekigahara. I'm sure he'll pronounce it in this, so that'll give me a little bit more to work with. But so that seems like we have a little bit more drama to deal with than this last one. Honestly, I thought this was just going to be okay, here's what everything you've watched built up to. But no, we got more drama to deal with. So that should be cool. So let's get this started. Let me turn that up.
At last, the Sengoku Jidai nears its close, but not without one final grand chapter.
Yay!
The year is 1598. Toyotomi
Thank
Hideyoshi,
you, I love years.
the second great unifier
that makes this
of
easier
Japan,
to follow.
has just died, leaving a council of 5 regents to guard his young son until he becomes of age to rule. By far the greatest of these regents is Tokugawa Ieyasu. His wealth is nearly that of the other regents combined. Hideyoshi, before his death, set in place a number of edicts to try and keep Japan from descending back into chaos, and to ensure the survival of his 5-year-old son, Hideyori. But loyalties are deeply divided, and suspicion starts to split the country almost as soon as he's gone. Some daimyo are still pretty bitter over the failed Korean campaign initiated by Hideyoshi, and
so with what's going on here, I'd imagine if this is one more campaign, we know who is going to be involved in kicking this off here. That's been heavily foreshadowed so far. And I would be excited in a sense to see this guy step up. But I don't know if, just predicting from where we are now, I don't know if one more part in this series can be justified if there is a whole nother thing where he comes in and takes over. I feel like that would justify more episodes than this series actually has. So I'm getting the sense he's gonna fail. That's my prediction. I might be wrong though. I'm curious.
so quietly, where few can hear, they whisper their support for the idea of a Japan ruled by a Tokugawa rather than by the son of this peasant who cost them so much. Others fear the Tokugawa's growing power. If he's not stopped soon, he may well become unstoppable. Still others see the instability of having a minor as a successor to the shogunate as a chance for advancement. Mightn't it be possible at this 11th hour for them to swoop in and somehow take the grand prize, all of Japan? One of those in this latter category was a man named Ishida Mitsunari. Ishida was a courtier.
Feels late to
not a
be
warrior.
meeting new people.
He had served Hideyoshi as an administrator, reporting to him on the state of the Korean campaign, and was famously skilled at finance. As Ieyasu continued to consolidate his power, often ignoring Hideyoshi's provisions against strategic marriages and hostage exchange, Ishida Mitsunari began to plot against him. He planned to have Tokugawa assassinated and came up with the perfect scheme. He would make it seem like the Maeda, one of the other powerful clans on the Council of Regents, was in on the plot, so that even if his assassination plan was discovered, the Maeda would be implicated and forced onto his side. Unfortunately, his plan backfired. Tokugawa had used his wealth wisely and had many people at all levels of society in his debt. He not only found out about the plot and the fact that the Maeda were falsely implicated, but also had a trusty Maeda retainer inform the head of the Maeda clan about exactly what was going on.
So I'm already getting the sense that I was kind of wrong there. But this feels so weird. There's got to be some... Obviously, we're talking about a whole campaign going forward, so this is definitely going to blow up at some point. So this can't just be snuffed out and then call it a day.
As one of his final acts, the aging Maeda clan leader, Maeda Toshiie, traveled to see Tokugawa personally to pledge his loyalty. Shortly thereafter, Maeda Toshiie died, and at his funeral, a number of Tokugawa generals planned to have Ishida killed, but Ishida fled to Ieyasu himself and begged for mercy. Strangely enough, Tokugawa granted it, probably deciding that it was better to have an enemy you knew rather than one that you didn't. Besides, if he had Ishida killed now, some other force would certainly arise to oppose Tokugawa in the Sengoku Japan. After being released, though, Ishida continued his scheming. He began to gather as many allies as he could, knowing that a final conflict with Tokugawa was inevitable. In 1600, that conflict began. Uesugi Kagekatsu, Uesugi Kenshin's heir, came storming into Tokugawa land from the northeast, while Ishida
I was about to say, like, isn't that the other guy? And okay, that makes sense here. It's so hard to follow. Like, even in the end, it's so hard to follow. I've learned, like, maybe 3 or 4 names that I could probably give you off the top of my head. Everybody else, I am relying on the drawings, on the color coding and all that. It's just so difficult.
Uesugi Kenshin's heir came storming into Tokugawa land from the northeast, while Ishida started to move his forces up from the west. But Tokugawa had allies of his own. In the last calm days before the war, Tokugawa had made a visit to a lifelong friend, one Torii Mototada, a man he had known since they both served as hostages to the Imigawa way back at the beginning of our tale.
Oh, that comes full circle. I like that.
And discussed the coming war. Tokugawa mentioned that the castle Mototada held was likely going to be one of the first points hit by the enemy, as it stood between them and Kyoto. Mototada acknowledged this, and said that he understood it would be the last time they drank together. They both knew that Mototada and his garrison couldn't possibly hold out. Mototada did not ask to leave or for reinforcements. Instead, he said he'd sell his life dearly, and that he did. When the attack finally came, his 2,000 men held out for 10 days against the onslaught of 40,000 Ishida troops. The castle itself wasn't breached until only 10 of Mototada's men remained. The entire garrison died there, but they took a heavy toll on the anti-Tokugawa forces, and the 10 days they held fast against the Ishida contingent of the army significantly delayed their march to Kyoto, which would prove crucial to Tokugawa in the end. Thanks to Mototada's sacrifice, forces loyal to the Tokugawa had time to rally and throw back the Uesugi.
Thematically, that's kind of refreshing. This whole series has had so much going, like so much betrayal, so many like underhanded moments, and to wrap it up kind of with a moment of true loyalty, it's kind of poetic in a way. I kind of appreciate it. It's one of those things where reality is it's like reality is stranger than fiction, but like I guess I would have to alter that. I'd say that reality is like a better writer than fiction in a sense. Like it's a very well told story, but it's more than just a story, it's just reality. And I really appreciate the arc of this one.
Leaving Ishida to face Ieyasu alone. The decisive conflict came at a place called Sekigahara, a river valley surrounded by hills. The forces were nearly evenly matched at roughly 80,000 men each. The Ishida had taken a strong defensive position on the west side of the valley, using the streams and hills to secure their line. The ground was a mire from the driving rains of the night before, and a thick fog shrouded the battlefield. But as the sun rose on October 21st, 1600, and the fog began to clear, the armies engaged. It was a grinding fight, neither side breaking, neither side losing ground or exposing a flank. Slowly, though, as the sun approached its zenith, the Tokugawa forces on the south began to give way. Things weren't going perfectly for Ishida either, though. Some of his forces weren't responding to his commands, and he'd gotten some pushback on a few of his orders for pretty minor reasons. But the fight was still going his way, so at last he decided to signal a full charge into the now exposed southern flank of the Tokugawa. He shot a flaming arrow into the air to signal the all-out assault. But something odd happened. The 16,000 men commanded by one Kobayakawa Hideaki didn't move. From the outset of the battle, those troops had just sat there, atop a hill at the very southern end of the Ishida line. Commanders from both sides had watched them nervously the entire time, with their flags planted and their men lined up on the southern rise, perfectly still.
Dude, I was about to say, like, well, I said a second ago that it was refreshing to have a moment of loyalty, like right towards the end. If we're having like a final double cross, though, that's probably even more appropriate. It's not as much of a feel good situation, and it would end up, assuming it works out, making me wrong on my prediction I made earlier in this video, which is kind of disappointing, but I love a good twist, so I'm down with it.
Frantic Ishida messengers had been sent up there all day demanding that they move, or at least trying to understand what was going on and why they weren't moving, but the messengers were simply turned away. Then, at noon, to the sound of a thundering volley from the Tokugawa arquebusiers, the Kobayakawa troops charged down the hill and slammed into the southern end of the Ishida line. Let me give you a little backstory here. The Kobayakawa were a bit of a wild card in this battle from the beginning, and no one on either side knew for sure what they would do. Ishida had promised great rewards to Kobayakawa Hideaki and brought him on his side. Heck, Kobayakawa had already fought for him in a previous siege. But Kobayakawa had promised his loyalties to the Tokugawa as well. You see, during the Korean campaign years ago, Ishida had accused Kobayakawa of recklessness, and Hideyoshi had taken away much of Kobayakawa's lands based on that charge, only to have them later restored when Tokugawa intervened. Turns out that Kobayakawa was still pretty pissed about that, and in the end, his seething resentment of Ishida won out over his desire for a grand reward. And so, as his forces came...
This is one of those things, like, it's probably better to explain all of this at once. The way that they make their videos, I really like the way they pace things, the way it seems linear, but then they go back for the context. They could have written it in a way where this guy is introduced to earlier and you kind of establish the resentment, and then it comes back later and it's like we could have seen that coming based on what's introduced earlier. But honestly, as an introduction thing, I like the way that they do it better, because it makes sure you're not going to forget that stuff from the past. Going over it all now actually makes it a little bit easier for somebody like me who's like brand new to this. So I like the way it goes. But it kind of, it depends how you're writing. Are you writing to educate? Are you putting the order of stuff to educate, or are you doing it to entertain? And this kind of walks a line between the two, but it kind of leans towards a way that I find more helpful, like educationally.
Barreling into the Ishida line, everyone knew what this meant. This defection was the end. It triggered defections from the other wavering commanders and collapsed the Ishida southern flank. In a few hours, there was nothing left of the Ishida forces. The last great army between Tokugawa and complete control of Japan was shattered and broken, their commanders dead or being hunted down before the year's end. With this, Tokugawa started redistributing land throughout Japan, granting wealth to those who'd been loyal to him and disempowering those who'd opposed him.
Like a spoils system.
In 1603,
I like
the
that.
emperor granted him the title of shogun.
I don't really love the idea of a spoils system. That doesn't hit very well to an American mind, because we are kind of, when we're taught about our own spoil system, it sounds incredibly corrupt. But also we got to think that this is the 1500s, like whether it's Asia or Europe or the Americas or whatever, it's not to be surprised that they have like a spoil system where you just shower the people who are loyal to you with the riches of victory. So that's fine. Like they don't need my permission. I say that as if I'm giving them permission in the past, and I get it.
And he ruled happily as shogun for about 2 more years.
Oh,
Yeah, that's right. After all that, he was officially shogun for 2 years. But unlike everybody else, this wasn't because he died or lost a battle. It was because he retired. And this may be one of the most important things Tokugawa ever does. He continued to rule safe in his home province for the rest of his days, but officially he passed the title of shogun to one of his adult sons, Tokugawa Hidetada, and gave him a fair amount of responsibility in managing the bureaucratic organization of the shogunate. Because Hidetada was an adult who already had a strong military record, and because he ruled in name, and even in part, in fact, for over a decade before Ieyasu died, no one opposed his continued rule when Ieyasu passed. There would be no upheavals like those that followed the deaths of Nobunaga and Hideyoshi.
I like that. That's sometimes the decisions you make as a leader are the most important ones that you make as a leader are the ones that will affect the next line. When you think about royalty, you've always got to try to reinforce the claim to the throne and make sure that the next person in line is prepared. So, like, I can kind of appreciate that. I get kind of also... it's kind of a mixture of George Washington vibes and mixed in with some royal stuff, because George Washington, what he did by stepping down, although he had so much influence and could have carried the country for a very long time, what he did in stepping down kind of legitimized the position more for the people who followed him up. So I can kind of appreciate this in that sense, but it kind of also gives me vibes of some stuff that I've seen in European monarchies, like that really focus on making sure they're prepared for the next generation. So that's kind of cool.
By retiring early, Ieyasu saw to that. This left only one piece that could possibly disrupt the succession of Tokugawas as undisputed rulers of Japan, and that was Hideyoshi's son, Hideyori. So every year, Tokugawa tried to lure him out of his stronghold at Osaka Castle, and every year he refused, until at last, Tokugawa just attacked him on the flimsiest of pretenses, an inscription that he'd put on a bell, which, if you really stretched its interpretation, could be considered an insult to the Tokugawa. Kind of. The siege of Osaka began in November of 1614, and by the late spring of 1615, the castle had fallen, and with it, the only Toyotomi heir. It was a year later, almost to the day, that Tokugawa Ieyasu died, and the country passed peacefully into the hands of his son, Tokugawa Hidetada. And like that, the period of the warring states, the Sengoku Jidai, came to an end.
Okay, so I guess final thoughts on the series in general. I've given a lot of them, but like the way that this has gone, I feel like a lot of the endings are underwhelming compared to a lot of the stuff that happens in the middle. And that's like, sometimes it's like incredibly satisfying, but sometimes like that end, it just like, okay, it's over after all that we've gone through. Like, I guess I expected something more, but no, like everything that happened at the end like totally made sense given everything that came before it. But my expectations were just different. But yeah, there was a lot of fun in this series. And a lot of you wanted me to check out the Admiral Yi series, and I'll get around to it eventually, because apparently it's kind of related to this. I don't know to what extent. It's like a series on Korea, so it's got some crossover apparently. And I know some of you are disappointed that I'm doing the Bismarck one first, but hey, there's probably going to be another poll in the future, and I assure you Admiral Yi is going to be on that. And if this last poll is any indicator, it's probably a favorite to win, since it came in second in this one. So we'll get to it. We absolutely will. Yeah, as far, it's not my favorite episode. As far as the end goes, it's definitely not my favorite episode. It might be a little lower on a bit of a lower rung, but I do think it was a decent conclusion to a great series. Maybe even, I don't know. I think I like the Seminole Tragedy one more. I'm not really sure though. But I think they're so different. It's hard to compare them. But yeah, let me know what other series you want me to check out. I have 3 that are going to be on the list for the next poll: the History of Paper Money, the Admiral Yi one, and the South Sea Bubble, and I'm gonna need one more to put on the next poll. So let me know what you guys would be interested in, and maybe it'll get on there and you'll have the chance to help me pick that one. So thank you to the channel members. Anybody who wants to buy a sticker, we got stickers now, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video. Later.